The third Sunday of Lent. This is the gospel that has been preached more than any other gospel in the gospel. This is the gospel that brings people to tears. This is the gospel that moves people. And this is the gospel that is probably the worst nightmare for anyone to prepare for. Primarily because what more can you say? The gospel itself speaks for itself. So there's not much that a person who stands from a pulpit can say to move the hearts or to even expand on what the Lord himself teaches. But my hope today is for us to look through this passage all together and find ourselves in the story. Find ourselves in the story and really look within our hearts in this period of Great Lent and say, Lord, where am I today? And where do you want me to be? And what do you want me to do? It starts with the psalm, actually. The psalm is very beautiful of today. From Psalm 79, verses 8 through 9, it says, "Let your tender mercies come speedily to meet us, for we have been brought very low. Help us, O God of our salvation, for the glory of your name. Let your mercies come speedily to us." And we get a beautiful image later on in this parable of the father running to his son, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I want to just, maybe for those who've heard this gospel but have never heard it before, maybe we can just open it up a little bit. So a father has two sons, and son comes to his father, and he asks him for his portion, his inheritance. Now, in Middle Eastern culture, we all know this, if you came and asked somebody for their inheritance, what is that indicating? It's indicating to the father that, Dad, I think you are dead. I want nothing to do with you. I want my money. Give me my money so I can be free from you. And the father, most of us, if our son or our daughter said that to us, the expression "اديله على قفاه" مش كده? We'll just smack him on the neck and say, get out of here. But the father, in his desire to give freedom to his son, he says to him, here, take it. And what does the son do? We all know the story. He goes, he wastes the money on possessions with prodigal living, and then there arose a great famine in the land. And it says that he joined himself to a citizen. Does anyone know what joined himself to a citizen is? That's my son, by the way. So he's coming to say hi. He joined himself to a citizen. And what does it mean by joining himself to a citizen? It means that he grabbed onto the citizen and said, please, please, I need a job, I need a job, I need a job. I'm desperate. I need something for you to help me through this famine. He attached himself to him. يعني غلس عليه شوية. Now this citizen was probably not a Jew. This citizen was probably someone from the Gentiles. And how do we know that? It's because he was feeding swine. He was feeding the pigs. We know that pigs are unclean animals in Judaism. And it gets to a point where he says, okay, you want a job? You can feed the pigs. You want a job? You can take care of them. And the son found himself in such a severe circumstance that he even desired to eat the food of the pigs. That's what happens when we separate ourselves from God. We find ourselves in severe famine. We find ourselves searching for things that will give us meaning. We find ourselves searching for career. We find ourselves searching for money. We find ourselves searching for lavish lifestyle. We find ourselves doing everything possible aside from what we know living in the Father's household is like, because we think that life with the Father doesn't bring fullness of joy. But then he thought to himself. The Bible says it very clear. He came to himself. He had a moment of realization. Life with the Father was so beautiful. I never had to worry about food. I never had to worry about drink. I never had to worry about clothes on my back. I never had to worry about anything because the Father was always there to provide for me. So hold on, let me prepare myself a nice sermon. Let me go back to the Father and let me tell him what I'm going to say. Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son, so take me back as a servant. And what do we know happens? As he's going away from a great way off, his father saw him and had compassion on him, ran, fell, and kissed him on his neck. I want to give you a little bit of background on this experience. In Jewish culture, there's something called the ceremony of the kizaza. Weird word, but it's a ceremony that basically says that if a son leaves his father's household, he's not permitted to come into the city unless the whole town comes out and meets him at the city gates. And what they do is they bring a pot with them. And before he enters, they smash the pot on the floor to demonstrate to him how much he's broken, not just the house of the father, but also the whole community. And usually the father, what he will do is he'll sit in his house, angry, show no emotion towards the son, and keep himself separate from him until the community basically gives him a chance to speak for himself. So that's why the son comes and prepares this sermon, because he has to give an explanation for himself. I've sinned. I'm not worthy to come before you. Just take me back as a servant. I don't even want to be anything more than that. Usually, the mom would come to the ceremony. Everybody knows the moms are the compassionate ones, the ones that will always take their children back no matter what. And the father will stay far off. But in this story, the father does something very different. It's the most beautiful, beautiful, beautiful image that all of us have. We've seen the icon of the prodigal son or paintings of the prodigal son. The father runs to his son. Runs. Have any of us seen our fathers who are older in age run to their children? In Middle Eastern culture, it's not appropriate for a father to run to his children. It's not appropriate. And in fact, he would have to lift his galabeya and show his legs. And that's even more of a fadiha. That's even more of something that he should not do. But what the father does is he lifts his robe up and he runs to his son and he welcomes him at the city gates and doesn't let this ceremony become that which is something that separates him from the community. But the father welcomes him, and what does he do? He kisses him on his neck. In some of the earlier translations, it says that he kisses him all over. It's a joyful encounter. That is the Lord to each and every one of you today. Every time we enter into his house, there isn't conditions. There isn't anything, as St. Paul says, that can separate you from the love of God. If you feel like maybe today I do not belong here, then you may have missed one of the quotes from St. John Chrysostom where he says the church is a hospital for sinners. The church is a place where the broken come to find healing. The church is a place in which the Father is always spread out with open arms for any person who wants to meet him. But in this story, he doesn't wait for the city to encounter him. He meets him at the city gates. And what does he do? He puts a robe on him. By the way, the son is still dirty. He's been feeding swine. He doesn't say, no, go take a shower. He says, no, bring the best robe in the house. And he covers the son. And he says, bring the ring. The ring is the indication of the power of the Father. And he puts it on his finger. And he takes sandals and puts it on his feet. Now, I know we hear this parable and we don't think of the magnitude of it, but think about what Christ was trying to say to the people here. St. Athanasius says something very nicely. He says, for the Father does not receive him as a hired servant. Notice, when he prepares his sermon, he says, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you, and I'm no longer worthy to be called the Son, and stop. The Father doesn't let him continue that which he prepares to say. The Father does not receive him as a hired servant, neither does he look upon him as a stranger, but he kisses him as a son. He brings him back to life as from the dead, counts him worthy of the divine feast, and gives him his former precious robe, so that on this account there is singing and gladness in the paternal home. This is the fatherly work of love, so tender and good. He does not only raise the man from the dead, but he also gives him back his tremendous grace by means of the Spirit. He gives him back tremendous grace. He takes him back as though he once was. We love the story of the younger son. But you know we can't read this gospel without talking about the older son. So if you are here today and you are feeling like, I am not worthy to be called your son, but just take me back as a hired servant, know that the Lord is stopping you full stop and telling you, no, you are welcome in this home. And that is the role of the church, to welcome those who are far off into the fold. We are to have the heart of the Father. Now, the older brother. If you are a real son to your father, what are you doing day and night as you see your father weeping over the state of his son who's far off? Are you sitting back? Are you hanging out, enjoying? No, you're doing everything that you possibly can to bring the son back home, because this is the beloved son of the Father. If you are truly a son, you can't see your father in a state of brokenness without desiring to do that which will gladden the Father's heart. But in this story, the son does what? He throws a tantrum. He gets upset. He says, this younger son of you wasted his life with harlotry. And he keeps himself distant from the Father. Lo, these many years I've been serving you, I've never transgressed your commandment at any time, and yet you never gave me a goat. But as soon as your son came back, you killed a fatted calf, and you held a great feast for him. And the father, again, in the humility of the father, what does the father do? The father goes out to meet his son. He doesn't meet just one son, he meets both sons. The father goes out to the older son and says to him, son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours. Look at the humility of the father. Look at the humility of the father, that he doesn't say, okay, you didn't care, you don't want to do what will bring me joy, you don't care that I threw a celebration. He meets this younger son, he meets the older son, and he pleads with him, and he tries to bring him back, and he tries to tell him, come, join this feast with me. It was right that we should make merry and be glad, for he was dead and is alive again, is lost and is found. Where are you today? Where am I today? Am I afraid to come back to the Father? The Lord is welcoming you with open arms. The Lord welcomes you every week with open arms in communion. He says to you, come. There's nothing that you can do that can separate you from my love. Join me. Let's hold this wedding banquet together. Maybe you're the older son who looks around and says, no, this person, he doesn't belong here. He looks a certain way, he dresses a certain way, he speaks a certain way. But the Father's still meeting you too. He's meeting you to remind you that even in your pride, He's going to come and speak to you and try to bring you back. This is the profound love that God has for each and every one of us. That regardless of where we are, He's with us in the midst. I pray that every single one of us can think about the immense love that the Father has for all of us. And that through the remainder of this Lenten season, we can think about things that maybe we want to offer to God. Maybe parts of us that we have kind of been keeping hidden. Maybe struggles that we've been holding on to. Maybe shortcomings that we've been struggling with for a long time. But the Lord is here welcoming with open arms to every single person who comes with a broken and contrite heart. May the Lord give us all grace, lots of grace, because this story is not a story that we should just read or a story that maybe we should shed a tear about, but it's a story that each and every one of us should put ourselves in, because the Lord is that sweet Father who desires every single one of us to be saved and welcomes each and every one of us into his home. And glory be to God